This is 10 reasons why mulching your garden is extremely important. Welcome to the garden in Raleigh, North Carolina. We've got piles of mulch all over the garden. We're going to move around, get some of it raked out, and talk about the benefits of mulch. The main benefit of mulch to me is that it really changes your soil structure. And I want to show you right here. We're in Raleigh, North Carolina, and our soil here in the Piedmont, which is the middle part of North Carolina, is a clay-based soil. And I can put that shovel in the ground just with my hands now and pull this thing out. And at the very bottom, we can start to see some of that clay, which we could make brick out of if I continue to go down at all. But you can see, I can put that shovel in the ground just by hand. I didn't have to put a foot on it or anything. But the top 3 inches or so have been transformed in 3 years using a combination of mulches. Mulch can be any organic material that you're adding to the top of the soil to improve it, really. So I'm eliminating things like rubber mulch and any kind of plastic mulches, anything that's not breaking down, because we're trying to get something that will actually be broken down over the after you've put it down and feed the things that are underneath it. So every shovel I put in the ground out here, there's earthworms, there's insects, some beneficial, some not, as we see this grub fall off the bottom. But it's completely and totally transformed this soil by allowing the protection of beneficial bacteria, beneficial microbes, earthworms, and some beneficial and probably some, again, non-beneficial insects that have a hiding place down here. They've taken this organic material, and as it breaks down and as they break it down, they make the nutrients available for the other plants, and they carry it deeper and deeper down into the soil. So the longer this goes on and the longer we're keeping this ground covered in organic material, mulch, the more it is improving. And I'm doing it from the top down. This wasn't mixed in. This is happening because these living things are doing this. They're carrying it up and down through the soil. We've put wheelbarrows of triple shredded hardwood mulch all over the garden, and now I'm in the process of raking it out. One of the things, another benefit, or number 2 on our list, is this mulch contains nutrients. So it's almost like a fertilizer, and we're at a very slow release fertilizer, and a fertilizer that is absolutely perfect because it only releases when it's warm outside. It only releases based on microbial activity breaking it down and making those nutrients available for your plants. And those beneficial bacteria, beneficial fungi are only active when it's warm outside. So it's not something that's going to be fertilizing your plants at a time of year when they're not able to use it. It's releasing at that time. Now the difference, between this triple shredded hardwood mulch versus, something like the pine bark mulch that we've used in the annual border right here, and the wood chips that we have down in our paths out here, there's probably a difference in the nutrients, that are in them. It probably depends on the tree and, the type of tree, the type of material that was used, as to what's in it. But it's all going to contain nutrients that are going to be slowly released back to your plants over the time that it takes for it to break down. Number 3 is moisture retention. And I think you could see that from when I pulled up used the shovel and pulled up that soil over there, how porous the top now is going to be with that humus layer that we've built right below the mulch layer. That is going to allow for the water, just any rain we get, to soak in. We're at the point now on this lot where we can get many inches of rain at one time, and it will just soak it into the ground. So we're not wasting any of it. It's not sheeting off the property. It's creating pores in the soil. It's also creating pretty good drainage as well. It's got the perfect amount of air in it. So it's allowing the water, moist but well-drained conditions basically out here. So we're leaving our leaves down in the fall as well. I want to point that out. So you're looking at many types of mulch that we'll use out here, as long as it's some sort of organic material that can feed these soil microbes. Doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's leaves, compost, humus, wood chips, pine bark, triple shredded hardwood like I'm using, raking out in these beds right now. Really doesn't matter. On slopes, it probably does matter a little bit. I would probably use pine straw or something like this triple shredded hardwood, because I think the difference in size in the material matters. And so on something like this hardwood, I've got fairly decent sized pieces, and then I've got this fibrous bark, and this stuff will mat onto itself. Like you can see right here, it'll squeeze down and mat onto itself and create a situation where it'll hold in place a little better than some of our, if I get Steph to back up a little more, she was not prepared for this. Something like this, pine bark is never going to squeeze together. So it's going to float, it's going to wash away. I'd only use this type of material in flatter spaces, but if you have any kind of slope, something that has multiple sizes on it is more likely to hold together. Before we get to 4, I'd like to mention that it's definitely the easiest to put your mulch, if you're ordering in bulk, on a hard surface. And I'll use this grain shovel or snow shovel, whatever anybody wants to call it, to scoop it up. And I can, it's pretty easy to get a pretty big scoop with this grain shovel on a hard surface. Much more difficult. Also, put it out as soon as possible. I've had this load of mulch for a couple of weeks. It's been rained on several times. It's much harder once it gets some time. Plus it's composting. I think you can see the heat coming off of it. And that leads us to number 4, because number 4 is mulch moderates soil temperature, which is extremely important. So in the summertime, we get temperatures here in the southeast. We'll have a week with temperatures right around 100 for sure. Every summer we'll get one of these, heat warning kind of weeks. Hopefully it doesn't extend longer than a week, but that's typically what we get. Mulch is going, because of that moisture retention and the cap that it's putting on the top of the soil, it will keep your soil cooler than those 100-degree temperatures outside. And then of course in the winter time, it's going to have the opposite effect, and it's going to keep the temperature slightly warmer than it would otherwise. So it's going to help your plants, against the extremes, of the weather. Kind of smoothing out the extremes by keeping the soil covered with an organic material. Number 5 is weed prevention. Mulch is important for having a solid barrier that prevents the sunlight from getting down to your native soil where most of the weed seeds reside, and preventing some of them from germinating. You're still going to get weeds. You're absolutely still going to get weeds. It's part of gardening. But you'll find as you build this organic layer on the top of your existing soil, the weeds are much easier to pull. The roots are easier to pull out of it. Also, that barrier that's on top, if you'll get this little bit of crust right on the top of your mulch, and weeds, if that's a little dry barrier, it'll be moist. It'll be more moist the further you go down into your mulch and the layers of soil. But that little cap on the top tends to stay a little bit dry, especially during the summertime, and weeds will have a very difficult time germinating on the top of that mulch. But for that reason, if it tries to germinate, it can't get down and get moisture very quickly. It will very quickly dry out in the sunlight. Probably need about 3 to 4 inches to really have a good weed suppression. I tend to only use about 2 to 3 inches of mulch at the time, and we'll mulch 2 times a year for the reason of weed prevention. Typically, I'm shooting this in May. Typically, I will get my mulch out sometime in early March, because soil temperature, when the soil temperature reaches about 60, 65 degrees, that's when crabgrass germinates, and a lot of weeds germinate in that range. That's when they figure the winter's over, the soil's warmed up enough. That's what triggers all those seeds to germinate. So we try to get this done typically almost 2 months earlier than I'm doing it right now. And then we'll come back around in the fall, and sometime around late September, we'll do this again. And so I do 2 slightly thinner layers over the course of the year rather than 1. And that fall application of mulch will prevent a lot of those henbit and winter weeds, chickweed and others that germinate in the fall. So that's my weed prevention strategy with mulch. Again, I'm still getting some weeds. For sure we're pulling some weeds out here, but they're easier to pull, and there's definitely less of them than we would have. One issue that we don't have as much of here in Raleigh with our clay soils is nutrient leaching. But those of you with sandier soils or super well draining soils have an issue with, during heavy rains, nutrients can leach, through the soil and out. So whatever fertilizer you're giving your plants tends to just leach out of the soil, probably ends up in creeks and streams and that kind of thing. So what the benefit of mulch in clay and sand is going to be to slow that nutrient leaching down. It's going to really just trap it in place. So it's good for absorbing that water, but it's not releasing all of it out into, down through your entire soil profile. So whatever fertilizers you're using, and of course the nutrients that are actually in the mulch, as it breaks down, they're not leaching and leaving your property, and it's helping to build. Sandy soils can be very difficult because of that reason. Heavier nutrients tend to fall deeper into the soil. Something like calcium will fall very deep down into the soil profile, where magnesium is a much smaller nutrient, less heavy, and it stays up in the soil profile, and it can give a weird mix of how nutrient availability is happening for your plants. It's overly complex, but mulch will help with that. It will help prevent some of that leaching that's happening through the soil. Number 7 is controls erosion, and I kind of touched on it over there with using mulches that have different sized materials to lock down on themselves. We have a very flat lot here in Raleigh, so it's just not an issue that we're going to have, but many of you are going to have erosion issues. And so getting the ground covered with some sort of mulch that will lock down on itself will prevent you from losing soil. Even if you were going to do projects way out in the future, I would consider on a sloped area where you're losing soil, to get some mulch down on it. You can, whether, it doesn't matter, wood chips, pine straw, anything you can get down on it to make sure you're not losing that topsoil, so that in the future, when you start working on these projects, you will have improved the soil while you waited to do these projects, instead of lost soil while you were waiting to do those projects. Number 8 is pretty obvious. The decorative function of mulch is very important. The color contrast that we get from having this gold foliage in this carex against that dark brown mulch, or this barberry, the purple foliage in that loropetalum right there, lighter flower colors pop off of it, and it creates, the aesthetic is fantastic. With that said, I'm not a big fan of dyed mulches in the bags. The chipped up pallets and that chipped up wood mulch is not one of my go-to things. I don't think it breaks down very quickly. It seems to want to wash away quite a bit. And, for me, I'm putting mulch down with the intent of the mulch being broken down by beneficial bacteria and beneficial fungi and feeding my plants. I think sometimes we're thinking about mulch as, what can I put down there that I never have to do it again? And so, the strategy for me is very different, because I'm trying to improve my soil. And of course it's aesthetically pleasing as well. But some of that dyed mulch to me, it doesn't seem to be breaking down when I see it. It doesn't seem to be doing the same function as these other things. And I'm also scared, when it's a chipped up pallet, I don't know where those pallets came from. I don't know what was on those pallets when they were shipped. I have no idea, what materials are potentially in that mulch that I might be adding to my garden. Probably overly paranoid there, but it's something I'm thinking about. The other thing with the aesthetic of mulch is, feel free to use different types of mulches. Where Steph is standing here, we have wood chips as our path. So those wood chips have a different color. Those have aged a bit. They have a different color than this fresh triple shredded mulch that we've added to the bed where I'm standing. And then if we go just to the left here, you can see along the annual borders, that's a slightly different color with that pine bark mulch as well. So we can get color contrast even within our mulches, using them for different purposes in the garden. Number 9 is about soil compaction. Many folks buying new properties, heavy machinery have done quite a bit of damage, to the property and to the soil. Pretty much killed everything in the soil by pushing it around, with heavy equipment. And it's extremely compact. And what you will find over time is that you know, putting a mulch cap on, having it break down over some period of time, you know, again, using any type of mulch, and compost, leaves, whatever it is, you'll find that those earthworms and all those insects and all that life and all that water and everything will start to create kind of a bit of a spongy soil. And I can feel that when I walk around this entire garden. On the paths, in the beds, wherever it is, there's a sponginess under my feet that's been created by this. That sponginess is also preventing me from over compacting them. We try not to walk in the beds that much. I mean, we're limiting the amount we're walking out there, but I can also tell that the soil is depressing when I step on it, but immediately popping right back up. Okay, so it's preventing that soil life that we're creating by keeping it covered and protected, you know, is not, you know, unless I put really heavy equipment on it, is always staying kind of light and fluffy, and there's air pockets in here. When air is super important. We think about fertilizer, we think about water, you know, that take care of our plants. Oxygen is also important to them, and there's oxygen, you know, down in this, you know, down in this mulch and the spaces, the voids that soil life is creating in it as well. Number 10, and it's not going to feel like it while you're actually mulching, is this saves time and ultimately potentially even some money in your gardening by putting this cap down and it doing all the things that we talked about in this video, with it reducing the amount of weed pressure, so you're going to have, you know, less weeding. By keeping a really healthy environment for your plants, hopefully you're going to have to replace less of your plants. Hopefully you're going to have less insect or disease issues affecting your plants. Almost certainly you are, by having, you know, by feeding the soil and letting the soil take care of your plants. Also, your water bill should be less, because you're hopefully collecting more water than you would have otherwise of having it just run off of the property. By having just bare dirt or lawn spaces. So there's a lot of benefit there as well. There's just overall less work. Again, it's not going to feel like it when you're actually out mulching, but once it's done, it's extremely rewarding. The garden just looks perfect. You know, there's that a few weeks after you put that mulch down, it's like, man, you know, I've really made an impact out here. All the things, all the planning that went into it, all the, you know, all those things came together, and, you know, I do enjoy it right after it's finished, for sure. So thank you guys for following along. Thanks for watching. I just wanted to go through the list, you know, the whole list of reasons why it's good to keep that soil covered and stay on top of keeping it covered. Thanks for watching.